Hello and welcome along to episode 306 of the Total Saints podcast, your home for all things Southampton Football Club. A huge thank you to our TSP Patreon community because we couldn't make the show each week without your loyal support. Tonight we're live streaming this episode on Facebook, X, Twitch, Instagram and YouTube, so do get involved in the comments if you're watching live. Coming up this week on the podcast, a 3-1 defeat to Newcastle at St Mary's on Saturday afternoon. So usual stuff. We're going to moan about VAR for a bit, talk about the crap goals we conceded. You know the drill. And then the quest to beat Derby County's record as the worst Premier League team of all time continues this weekend with a trip to our old friends Ipswich. So we're going to preview that one for you. My name is Martin Starke. Joining me this week, Steve Grant, who is the owner of Saints Web. Glen is writer of the blog League One -10. And George Rees-Julian is Southampton reporter at the Daily Echo. So let's get into the football, shall we? For the first time in our 140-year history, we've had to endure 6 home defeats in a row. These, my friends, are special times indeed. Glenn, it's a bit more easy this week, isn't it? It's the better team won.
Yeah, very much so. We've had in the last sort of few games that we've played, we've had sort of large periods of the game where we just packed it in basically and just conceded goal after goal. It was, as far as we were concerned, we did reasonably okay throughout the 90 minutes. I never felt like there was a period of the game where, we were absolutely shocking. There was quite a large boring bit after Newcastle scored their 3rd goal where we didn't do very much, but at least we didn't concede a lot more goals in the middle of it. Newcastle were the better side. I could tell that just from watching the warm-ups. To be honest, when you
really,
it's interesting down the chapel end now because you get the away team warming up in front of you and you see how sort of like at close quarters how physically big they are, how sharp they are with the passing and the shooting drills and all that sort of stuff. And it's very, very different to what you see at the other end when you see players basically just passing the ball into the crowd instead of into the net. It's something that will never fail to annoy me for how professional footballers can't get the ball on target in a warm-up drill. That it just winds me up big time. Shane Long was the best ever for it. He was unreal. It was almost like he thought it'd be bad luck if he actually put one in the warm-up. So but
we don't waste all the good finishes, do you?
Absolutely not. But no, Newcastle were different levels, and you look at all 11 of their team, and they're a class apart and compared to ours. And that's what when you look at our starting lineup, I was looking at it and I was thinking 6 out of these 11 aren't good enough. And on any given day, you might get 2 of them have a good game, 2 of them have an average game, but 2 of them are going to be bad. And you kind of know that that's not going to be enough against a team like Newcastle. I mean, go through them. I thought McCarthy had a decent game. I thought he was the best out of the kind of also rans. So he was decent. Then you had the likes of Bree, Onuachu, Aribo, who were okay, and then you had Ryan Manning and Adam Armstrong, who were not. So overall, it kind of dragged us down. But Newcastle were too good, and when you've got a player like Isak who can. It's not just the goals he scores; it's the runs he makes and the way he lays the ball off. He sort of plays as a centre
first touch
forward.
for that 2nd goal was absolutely ridiculous.
Ridiculous. And he
do that.
And he was heavily involved in the 3rd goal as well, which was like Isak 1 touch to Gordon, 1 touch to Tonali, 3rd man run. No one tracks him. It's just you can't. I don't mind letting in goals like that because it's a brilliant goal, and our defenders and midfielders are not good enough to keep that sort of play out, and that's fine. We didn't give away silly goals yesterday. I mean, I'll let someone else talk about the VAR decision for the penalty. But yeah, so I haven't gone 3-1 down. It got a bit dull until Fernandes scored, and then that got ruled out as well. And it was. I didn't feel as bad coming away from that game as I had from some of the other ones like Brentford and Tottenham, when we just basically might as well not have bothered turning up. At least we had a game yesterday. We did well. I think things didn't go for us as well. Refereeing decisions, not just the big ones, the sort of like general play ones. I mean, I don't think he gave us a free kick at all in that first half.
Not a single foul at all. There was one offside, and that was it.
Yeah, it really, and against teams like Newcastle, you need everything to kind of go your way to have a chance, and that certainly didn't happen. So no, overall, left the ground thinking they were too good for us. There you have it, really.
Steve, I'll get your thoughts on the penalty and the VAR in just a moment. George, we should just talk. I mean, we started all right, to be fair. I mean, we took the lead. It tells you all you need to know that Jan Bednarek is now our joint top scorer. But, a good goal. And for the first sort of, 20 minutes or so, we gave it a go.
Yeah, it sort of follows a similar thread, though, for all we've seen this season, and especially in the recent games under Ivan Urich. I think it's 3 of the last 5 games Saints have taken the lead and gone to lose the game. They've sort of done the first bit. They're able to now go ahead in games. It felt like that was the biggest problem previously, but keeping goals out is still a massive, massive problem. So the players just don't seem to react to any setbacks. And I don't think they had another shot on goal after Newcastle went 2-1 up. I think the Kyle Walker-Peters one at half-time, just on half-time, was the first since Newcastle's second goal. And just going back to the goals Alexander Isak scored and the way he sort of helped them get the third one. I listened to Jan Bednarek's interview with Adam Blackmore, and he was sort of speaking about how Ivan Urich wants the defenders to defend, and he sort of mentioned that you can't really give a striker a yard of space in the Premier League, and perhaps the way they're trying to defend now does allow that at times. And I think if you look at the second goal and the third goal especially, that's all down to the fact that players have a bit of space. Okay, it's against Newcastle, they've got unreal players. Perhaps it's not the way they're defending. Those players are just really, really good. But I think it's something to look at in the next few games, because they can't give players spaces, and they do keep doing it, and that's why they keep conceding goals. And no matter how well they start games, you do always feel like they're going to concede at some point, and you never really back them to react well after they do that.
I think you pointed out today it was 359 minutes since we last scored a Premier League goal at St Mary's. So it felt longer. It felt longer. It really did. Steve, let's talk about the penalty. To me, that was a corner all day long. Really odd one, that.
In real time, it was weird because it just looked like the two players kind of fell against each other, kind of legs a little bit tangled. It's only when you see there's one of the replays, one of the angles where you can kind of clearly see that Aribo does kind of whack into the back of Isak's calf first, which then they then both go down together, and then Aribo gets a toe end on the ball to get it away. But it's one of those where I think if you'd given it in real time, I think there's probably fewer complaints. But then taking as long as they did to then overturn it feels like it goes against this. I mean, they've binned off the phrase clear and obvious because they were getting hoisted by their own petard with it, but they've changed it now to there's got to be a high bar for an overturn, and frankly, I'm just not convinced that meets the high bar. Some of the stuff that we've seen that hasn't been overturned this season, for and against us, just doesn't feel like it's anywhere near the sort of level that should have been required. I mean, ultimately, I've got no particular issue with it being a penalty if he'd given it, as I say, initially, if he'd been able to, if he or the linesman had spotted it. Linesman, I thought, must have had a good view of it. But yeah, I mean, we'll come on to those officials again for their part later in the game. But I mean, as Glen mentioned, a lot of it was the little decisions that didn't go our way, and Dan Burn was apparently allowed to assault Paul Amo-Ameyaw for the entirety of that first half. And one such incident is what basically led directly to the second goal. It's like Amo-Ameyaw's trying to hold the ball up and be the target man that we want him to be, at a time where we've literally just conceded. So that's kind of the moment that we're always most vulnerable, as we've sort of discussed a lot this season. And he's doing his best, and he's gone to hold it up. And Dan Burn basically has him in like a bear hug, and apparently that's fine. And also, it's also not. I assume it's probably too far back for them to then revisit in terms of whether VAR gets involved in that. I mean, they'll find some way to justify whichever decision they take. This is the thing. They've made everything. They want everything to be black and white, and yet they've given themselves so many different little get-outs on every single little facet of where VAR can or cannot, or should or shouldn't intervene. That now they've tied themselves in knots, and there's just 5 million shades of grey. And so as a result, they can basically pick any given moment, and they'll say, "Well, no, he was right not to intervene because of this, and this." Whereas in reality, like 2 years ago, you were saying, "Well, no, he's got to be. He shouldn't be getting himself involved in this." So yeah, I mean, it's a shambles, and I mean, I say this as someone who was very much pro VAR at the start and tried to defend it for a long time during its sort of early teething problems. But no, it's a waste of time. I mean, you saw the reaction from the fans over the Fernandez disallowment, where you've now got everyone shouting it's not football anymore. People are fed up with it, and people are gonna just say, no, I'm done with this. Can't be asked. And I mean, ordinarily you'd say, well, we're going down, so it's fine. We're not going to have to put up with it for much longer. But I know the EFL are looking at possibly bringing it in at some point. So
I feel like we all owe Wolves an apology, because they were the only team that voted against it, weren't they? And
well, yeah, but Wolves,
they did that vote again this week.
Well, but Wolves's claim was so spurious about a load of incidents that everybody looked at, and actually it's like, well, hang on, you weren't done over there. It's just their perception. It's the same with Arsenal. Arsenal fans getting their knickers in a twist because a referee has sent two of their players off for second bookings. And then they produce a dossier of 500 players over the last 20 years who have done the same offence and got away with it. And it's just like, it's just so tedious. And yeah, it's just ultimately the whole thing's just not worth bothering with. It's not reduced the errors that we were promised that it would.
And the other thing about the VAR for the second goal was that took 4 minutes. Everyone knows it took 4 minutes. There were also 6 substitutions in that second half, apparently. How many minutes were added at the end? 5. How does that work? I mean, that's another thing. The amount of extra time seems to be a random guess as well. So not that I cared, because we'd lost the game, so 5 minutes was fine. But if you're going to do it properly, there probably should have been about 9, because 4 minutes was already taken up on the one VAR decision. So that didn't make a lot of sense to me either. And that's another thing that they just seems to be random. And I think Steve's hit the nail on the head there with they've given themselves so many get-outs now that it just gives rise to certain teams thinking they're just making this up as they go along. And that is kind of how it seems. Where as soon as the Aribo foul went to VAR, and they took 3 or 4 minutes, so everyone's thinking, well, it can't be that clear. But we all knew it was going to get given. I was 100% convinced it was going to get given. I don't know about anyone else. What
about you, George? Because you get a better replay than we do, I guess.
I think the one they kept showing us is the one that Steve was talking about there, where you could clearly see Yaz made contact to it. I must admit, I thought it was a penalty in the moment. Perhaps I've been blinded by the fact that they always seem to give these crazy penalties, and I should apply for a job with a PGMOL instead. But I don't know. I think it was like Glen saying as well. And when they do take a while, they're going to give it. It's almost like they don't need to go over and sell it to the monitor anymore. Once it's gone over 1 or 2 minutes, it feels like they're trying to then justify giving it. And it's the same with the Mateus Fernandez. When we saw on the monitors that it was given as offside about 1.5 minutes before they even bothered to say it. I don't know what they were checking afterwards. I don't know if it was a bit of contact, but it just took so long, and the fans were.
So the thing with that one, what I think they were trying to do was find an angle which showed that Cher touched it. because if he had touched it, because it was a deliberate attempt to play the ball, that would have meant that the line drawing would have been completely redundant, because the play gets reset at that point, at that moment of contact. But I mean, the thing that I raised this on X last night was that they've looked at that the wrong way.
Yeah.
Because surely, having given the goal on field, they've been saying this year with the whole high bar thing, the on-field decision carries weight. That has been the catchphrase that Howard Webb has been using in that nonsense program he does with Michael Owen, and where Michael Owen basically just stands there and just nods his head and agrees with him. Mr. Personality. What a great program that is. And they've gone about it the wrong way, because the goal's been given. So what you're looking for is incontrovertible proof that that the goal shouldn't stand. So what they've got to find proof that he didn't touch it. And there's one angle on the highlights I saw. I think it was even the angle they used for the static offside line, where when the ball goes over and you see that Cher kind of goes up for it, you can see the ball deviate there. So that to me looks like proof that he's made contact, and therefore it's onside, and the goal should stand. There was certainly nothing from any of the angles that I saw where you could definitely say, no, Cher he's gone for it, but he's completely missed it, and therefore, okay, fine, the offside can stand and you can overrule it. They talk about, we've got certain processes, and these processes have got to be followed, and we'll no doubt have Howard Webb explaining why it was the correct thing to do this week. But no, that's bollocks for me. Absolute nonsense.
I assume you agree, Glenn. Yeah. Final words on VAR.
There's nothing else left to say. I try not to get too angry about it now, because it's like a game of pin the tail on a donkey, where you've got your eyes shut and someone's moving the board around all over the place, and you're just randomly. It's just complete. It's a complete shambles. It's whereas you used to have to rely on a referee and the two linesmen. You used to have to rely on that, and you would trust it, and you trust it in the Championship now. And that occasionally they get it wrong, but with VAR, they are honestly making it up as they go along. They change the wording, as Steve said. They change the things that they're looking for within the same season. It's just a shambles. But I don't think there's the will to. Well, Howard Webb should basically be sacked at the end of the season, because the whole officiating and VAR, it's getting worse. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. So, usually when you've got an organisation that's failing in every major area, then there's changes at the end of the season. So, to me, Howard Webb should go. But I don't think there's going to be.
There's no accountability there, is there, at all?
No, none at all. Do referees still get stood down if they make? Do VAR officials get stood down if they make?
Theoretically, yeah. But part of the problem is that Webb is not long retired. So he's refereed alongside some of these guys that are still there. He'd have been refereeing when Michael Oliver first got into the Premier League for a start. Stuart Atwell, definitely. And
did you see? Was the Arsenal one? The Arsenal one the weekend with
Michael Oliver. Yeah.
Well, what 75 yards from goal, and that's given as a professional foul. It's just madness. So they make it up as they go along. It's getting worse. We've only got 15 games left of it.
15 games.
At least we can have a year off, at least, hopefully, and and go from there. But it's a shambles, and it's almost not worth analysing it now. You've almost just got to shrug your shoulders and get on with it.
Yeah, and we'll be talking about something else, if not next week, the week after, won't we? So, it's just that's the only thing that seems to be consistent at the moment is the inconsistencies. George, it was always going to be a big ask yesterday with Diblin out, Sunamana, no Ramsdale as well. That was sort of a last-minute thing, wasn't it? So that was going to cause a few problems yesterday, and we were up against it from the start.
Yeah, I think Saints have struggled for a settled front two They've chopped and changed around a lot, and I thought Camaldine and Diblin sort of offer you something. And when you don't have either of them in the side, given the way that games have gone recently, you're then left with Onuachu, who seems more like someone who can make an impact off the bench rather than start. I think he sort of drops off physically when he's played 45 minutes, and Ivan Urich has talked about he needs to be physically at it to be able to compete. And I thought he sort of drops off in games. So bringing him on would have been much better. And Adam Armstrong, I'm not too sure what he does at the minute. He had those 2 chances at the start of the game. I thought he started quite all right considering the way he's played, but then I don't think he had a sniff after that. And I spoke to him in the week about his struggles, because start of the season he's seemed like someone who might have a better fist of the Premier League this time around, coming in with the same team, bit of momentum from the Championship season, and he just looks totally off it. I think he's something ridiculous now, like over 2 months since his last Premier League goal. He doesn't put it down to confidence, although I don't think a player would ever necessarily come out and openly admit that they're short of confidence, but there's got to be something there. And I think a lot of the players are like that now. But you got Sugawara looked a right start of the season. He looks totally off it. Cameron Archer looked a right start of the season. He looks like he's lost a bit. I think Mateus Fernandes, for me, is the only one who every single week you sort of get a 7 out of 10 performance out of him. You thought he was unlucky to not get the goal. He was frustrated. He thought it was a touch on the ball. And I don't see how they would be able to keep hold of him in the Championship, because he's played against that Newcastle midfield and stood out. So it's probably another player who you've got to enjoy him while you've got him.
Yeah, and I think we'd all wish him well. George, it's your first time on the pod since Ivan Urich was appointed. So I just wondered your thoughts on him so far. I mean, I'm looking at it, in black and white. He's not won a league game yet. We had round pegs in square holes. It seems to me it's now round pegs in round holes, but the pegs aren't good enough. I mean, any promising signs for you? And does he know what he's doing at least?
I think they have looked better. There's been games where they've looked like the Man United game for 75 minutes, second half, and Nottingham Forest. Even the game against Newcastle, I thought they looked all right. But like you said, when you don't win a game, it's difficult for anyone to think you've done a good job. And it does feel like an appointment that was probably made at the wrong time. They brought him in, having not paid much money for him because he was available. Maybe had to buy out his Roma contract because he was still getting paid by them. But then they haven't really backed him in the transfer window to bring in the players that he needs to play the system that he wants to play. They're using someone like James Bree at centre-back. Don't think he really fits what they need. They've not really got enough physical players up front to be able to get crosses into them, and they're sort of left trying to do things that doesn't quite work. I think there's certain elements of what he's done has been quite good. I think the fact he's very honest with the players, he's probably telling them that they are as bad as they have been in some games, which might help, but I just don't see where he's going to be able to almost win a couple of points. And it was always going to be difficult for a manager who come in at this stage in the season with a squad that wasn't good enough already to be able to turn things around. And unfortunately for him, he's not even started to do that.
Yeah, there's no signs of overcoming that 10-point deficit just yet, that's for sure. Anything else on Newcastle? I've got the tall Paul, the foul on him, which seems to sort of go unnoticed. And we were talking about Kyle Walker-Peters starting at right back as well. We've been kind of making a claim for that, but it just didn't really seem to click for me yesterday with Ryan Manning. I don't know what anyone else thought.
Well, Ryan Manning can't beat a player and can't get a ball in, can he? And so that kind of negates having a left footer on the left-hand side. The reason you have that there is to be able to, go on the outside and cross the ball, but he didn't do it. And so no, that didn't really work. And I thought he had a poor game. But as we've said before, Ryan Manning if he plays really well, then he's just about passable as a Premier League left back. But against a good side like Newcastle. No, sorry there, Steve. I butted in a bit there.
Yeah, the problem I think we have with our fullbacks is that they end up too far forward when they're receiving the ball. So there's no forward momentum there. They're already kind of at the forward point. They're right next to the opposition fullback. Whereas if they were receiving the ball on the run, maybe 2 or 3 yards sort of further back, then you've got a little bit of momentum and you can actually get past the opposition fullback with 1 or 2 touches, and then all of a sudden that crossing opportunity opens out. I mean, we saw from James Bree, didn't take a touch, didn't need to set himself, just whipped the cross over, and suddenly Jan Bednarek finds himself completely unmarked in the 6-yard box. So it's not that we can't do it. I mean, Manning's kind of one contribution in the game really was sort of towards the end of the first half, where he did put one really good crossover. But the keeper was able to come out and get to it relatively comfortably because Amo-Ameyaw was once again being cuddled by Dan Burn.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can kind of sort of lament the quality of our fullbacks till the cows come home, and yeah, they're ultimately, realistically, they're probably, most of them aren't up to scratch. But we've got to give them a little bit of a helping hand at times as well. Because yeah, we pass the ball into their weaker foot. So they're already facing backwards. So where else are they going to go? They're going to pass it backwards or sideways again. We give them so few options that even if Ryan Manning could suddenly develop the ability to sprint past a fullback or a right winger, he's not being given the opportunity to do so because the pass into him is always behind him, and therefore he's only kind of looking at a sort of 90-degree angle that he can do anything with. So yeah, it's frustrating. I agree. He wasn't anywhere near kind of the levels that I think we've seen reasonable levels from him based on the very low expectations. But yeah, he wasn't up there yesterday.
There's a discussion to be had around fullbacks and who starts when we get into the Ipswich preview in just a moment. So I will get all your thoughts on that. TSP Player of the Week. It was Leslie Ukachukwu last week. I think maybe second time this season. So thank you for all the votes on that. George, it was lots of 4s and 5s in your your scores for the players. Is there anybody that stood out for you who got the most?
Yeah, I think I've already mentioned him, Mateus Fernandez.
Yeah,
he was good. Unlucky to like I said, unlucky with that goal being offside and won the ball back a lot of times. I think it was his cross that from the corner, which Harwood-Bellis had that acrobatic one, could have gone in, maybe turned the game around a little bit. I've said before about him, he's a brilliant player. I think he's someone who, when he arrived, no one knew anything about him, and now we know a lot about him, and we probably won't see him for much longer, I feel like.
Yeah. Is that fair, lads? Anyone else we're going to put on the list? Bednarek maybe for the goal. Two goals, 2 games.
Yeah, McCarthy maybe. Couldn't do anything about the goals and pulled off a couple of decent saves. There was one brilliant save from Joe Linton in the first half, which he tipped onto the post, which actually won't go down in the stats as a save because the flag went up correctly. But yeah, that was a brilliant save down to his weaker side.
Well, stick McCarthy on there then. Glenn, happy with that?
Yeah, Ryan Fraser. No, I'm joking. What was that about? Sorry. Yeah, I'm going off. So I generally agree with George about Urich in that there's been an improvement, but it is bizarre. We still haven't got a point, and we're saying there's an improvement. But he's still doing some weird things with substitutes. So he brought on Ryan Fraser and put Sugawara as a centre back. Where, my word, you don't want to do that. Now I know we all talk about him, but Bella Kochap was right there. Give him 10 minutes. Get him on the pitch. See if he can last 10 minutes. That was a bizarre one. Where has Ryan Fraser come from? And he didn't go and stand next to Paul Amo-Ameyaw, which is a shame because I would have liked to have seen that. But so. The only other, I thought Carl Walker-Peters had a decent game. Right back, I thought he did his job pretty well, but slim pickings really after Fernandez and McCarthy.
Carl Walker-Peters for one final time, maybe.
Maybe.
We'll get onto that as well. Right, we will put a little poll up on our social media and then we'll announce the winner, of course, next week. Before we get on to looking ahead to Ipswich, I mentioned briefly at the start of the pod that TSP is entirely fan-supported. It's powered by an incredible community. We've got over 200 Saints fans who keep this podcast going. You can join us for free on Patreon and you get access to our Patreon-only Fantasy Premier League. We do a weekly predictions league on there. We've also got a WhatsApp community and there's over 50-plus Saints fans in there. there in just a few weeks we've had it going. So there's loads of things to get involved in, plenty of opportunities to get things off your chest, certainly on a Saturday afternoon or a Monday morning. If you'd like to support us monthly, you get an ad-free version of the podcast. That's an audio and a video version. There's merch bundles we do at the end of the season. We do shout outs in every episode. You get discounts in the shop as well. And right now you can also become a TSP patron right here on YouTube. So if you are watching, just press the join button below or check the link, which will be in the description, to get all the same perks as our Patreon members. And above all, thank you for joining us and supporting TSP. Even just subscribing and hitting that like button will mean the world to us. We really do appreciate all your support. So thank you very much indeed. Right, Ipswich up next. Get ready for some last-minute heartache, because that always seems to be the case. I mean, if we're going to beat Derby's record, and that seems to be the only thing left this season, Steve, we're going to have to pick up some points here, because I think we're still 5 points short of their record.
Yeah, still plenty of work to do, which is ludicrous.
And this won't be easy, will it?
It won't, because they will be thinking, well, given that we've just shipped 10 goals in our last two games, this is the opportunity for us to kind of put things right and start looking in the other direction. Given that obviously Leicester managed to take a win out of their appointment with Dr. Tottenham this afternoon, so they are out of the relegation zone for the first time in a few weeks.
Every week, though, our result to Tottenham just looks worse and worse, doesn't it?
Oh, it's ridiculous.
We lost 5-0 to Dr. Tottenham.
What the? Yeah. It's nuts. But you're right. They've had a couple of heavy defeats, haven't they? So on paper, this would be one that they're looking forward to.
Yeah, it should be. But it's also a game that weirdly we've had the better. I mean, despite the results, obviously, I think for the vast majority of the last two games, well, in fact, all three games that we've played in the last season and a half, I think we've largely had the better of them. But it's been that kind of common problem of not putting chances away when we've had them, like the home championship game last season where Shea Adams had the entire goal to aim at and he hit the goalkeeper's face. And then obviously the two 96th, 97th minute goals in the subsequent games. And both of those games should have been won. We should have been out of sight at Portman Road. We should have been 3-4-1 up at sort of comfortably at half time. And we didn't get the game won. And they were a team that always go to the end and as shown by those late goals against us. So, yeah, it's another one where we're going to have to do something that we've not done very much this season, and that is
win.
Well, obviously win, but stay focused for the full quota of minutes. Because I mean, you can point to pretty much every game this season, even that Everton game where we did win. They had a lot of chances, and we had little spells where we lost the plot, and we've got to make sure that we don't have any of those on Saturday, because if we do, then that's Ipswich will scent blood, and that'll be their opportunity.
You know they're going to give this a real go as well, Glenn. They've got some players that could potentially cause us some problems as well. We've talked a lot about our recruitment, and a lot of people have compared the players that we brought in to some of those at Ipswich, and they seem to have done some decent business.
Well, they spent a lot of money because they had more scope to spend a lot of money because they weren't up against it with the PSR regulations. You know, they weren't carrying around with them an 85 million loss from a relegation season 2 years ago like we were. So they had the scope to spend more money, and you could, you know, though they were very similar to us last year, ultimately they finished 2 positions above us. So you could say they were in a better position to start with as well. They obviously had longer to plan. And they've recruited some good players. I mean, the one that's really interesting, of course, is Liam Delap, because apparently fees were agreed with us and with Ipswich, and he chose Ipswich because I think the quote was that, you know, they wanted him more, which probably means they offered him more in terms of wages and stuff like that. So again, that goes back to who was really running our recruitment in the summer, like we said a couple of weeks ago, which is a situation that hopefully Dragan Solak has moved to try and rectify for this summer. So you do wonder if we did miss out on Liam Delap because of the sort of void the structure that was there and has caused us problems. Yeah, I mean, Ipswich, I've always thought out of the 3 promoted clubs, maybe because of the players they bought and because of the spirit that they got together from the 2 seasons to get promoted, I always thought they were the most likely out of the 3 to stay up. I know Leicester won today, but I still feel that they'll go down. Ipswich, yes, they've been turned over the last 2 games, but it was Manchester City back at their best and Liverpool. So they will certainly be looking at this game as a must win. And I think in some ways there's more pressure on them than there is on us. I mean, we're down at the end of the day. They have to win this game.
We can't call it a 6-pointer anymore, can we?
No. Not. Well,
perhaps if we have got 6 points.
perhaps if we get 6 points for it, we might have a chance of not finishing so far behind. But so I know that the manager is making noises about we can still stay up. I'm sorry, rubbish. So we've got to put them under. That has got to put them under more pressure than we are. So, but having said that, Urich should definitely treat this like it's a cup final.
Yeah.
So I mean, I for his sake, he has to win it. He has to win this game, otherwise, there's a very real chance. Is it Bournemouth at home coming up next?
Yep.
So, and that'll be easy, won't it? Jesus. So so if he loses these next 2, I think all the goodwill, any goodwill towards him, I think it will be in danger of disappearing. Because at the end of the day, he's got to get some points at some point. It's all very well saying, yeah, we look better, but if we're looking at next season in the Championship, you've got to win something like 25 games, and he's got to show us that he can get a team of players, no matter how bad they are, to win the odd game. Otherwise, it's a problem. But I mean, it is going to be tough. Ipswich have got Delap, obviously. They've got Hutchison and Philogene behind him, who are decent, and they've got solid central midfield with Morsey and Phillips. I say this every time. Morsey is one of these cloak of invisibility players who just commits 15 fouls a game and never seems to get booked. So, yeah, be interesting to see what happens with the referees and stuff like that. I strongly believe, even though he struggled against Nottingham Forest, I strongly believe we need to bring Flynn Downs back in, because it's Morsey and Phillips that we're up against, and I just think we need more someone a bit more combative in there than.
It's more his level, isn't it? That's for sure.
Yeah, and he knows he can do it against Ipswich. They I mean, if there's a weakness, the centre backs and the goalkeeper are where you have to look. So we have to pose a threat up front, which is not really our thing. So we'll have to try and do that. And
they've changed the keeper, haven't they? Urich finally got dropped.
Yeah.
So they brought back Christian Walton, who, I mean, I don't think anybody ever expected that he would be a Premier League goalkeeper, but because they made a bit of a balls up, I think, with the guy who was in goal for them last season, who was pretty good, I thought. But they didn't offer him a new contract, and so he ends up at Burnley, and he's probably going to be quite potentially switching places with them in the summer. But yeah, Walton has been. I mean, he's been. I don't think he's made any complete howl-ups, whereas Urich, I think, had 4 or 5 errors that led directly to a goal. So yeah, I think they've slightly stepped up there, but probably at the expense of his ability to play the ball out. So I imagine we're probably not going to be looking quite so sharp on sort of the high press and picking up on any sort of lax passing out of the back, because frankly Walton's not up to it, so they probably won't do it. But yeah, I mean, we'll see what Urich comes up with in terms of strategy for that.
Yeah, and who's fit?
I mean, what are we going to play up front? I mean, I personally, I think Amo-Ameyaw has to play. Camaldine will play if he's fit, but otherwise, you're looking at Armstrong and Archer, who both basically look absolutely awful at the moment. So, what choices do you have? I mean, I think Paul will play, and then just hopefully Camaldine's fit, unless you're going to go and pick someone like Sam Amo. It's not going to happen. So, but for me, he's got to do something. I think he has to go out and win this game. But I do wonder if we've got it in us to win any game at the moment, unfortunately. So.
What are your thoughts, George?
Well, I think he mentioned he's hopeful that the Camaldine will be able to play, although his quotes prior to the game were that the fitness staff are pretty worried that his injury might cause him to be out for a little while. I think Camaldine's biggest issue is if he plays football, he gets injured and then he has to miss out for a couple of weeks. He did mention as well that he thinks it's time for Wellington to get onto the pitch. So that'll be interesting. I think maybe he watched what Ryan Manning did and didn't really affect the game and thinks, well, we'll play a different player down that left-hand side. And then we've got Albert Grunbeck, who we haven't seen either. He only trained once or twice, I think, prior to the Newcastle game. So no surprise that we didn't see him. He sort of thinks he can play in sort of the Mateus Fernandes role, but I wouldn't drop Mateus Fernandes, but he thinks he can play further forward or a little bit deeper. So perhaps you chuck him up front. It's worth a try to stick someone else up there because no one's doing the business, are they?
No, I was going to ask you, Steve, about fullbacks, and as George mentioned, there, I had picked up on like the Wellington stuff. It sounds like I do admire his honesty. Like Ryan Manning's obviously not had the best game, and then he comes out and says, "Well, maybe Wellington's going to come in," and we've seen that before, haven't we? Where a player's not really performed, and he's not directly called them out, but dropped strong hints that they're not going to be featuring the following week.
Yeah, I mean it's surprisingly unsubtle. I mean, I guess that kind of comes from the sort of background of where you're in Italian football. There is no real diplomacy when you've got a microphone in front of you. Whereas over here, obviously, everyone's very sort of media trained, and you don't say anything you don't give anything away really. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what Wellington's looked like because he played one half
minutes the 20,
didn't he? And then was in the lineup for that game last week, and then him and Bella Kotchap were mysteriously removed. Or I don't know whether it was just a printing error or something. Whether they'd been given the team sheet the night before and it changed before the actual team sheet went in. But yeah, so we've only got 45 minutes of evidence in terms of what he can do in this country. So yeah, I mean we don't know. We don't know what he's going to be like. Whether he's going to be able to step up, sort of in the need of battle, if you like, but it's worth a go, isn't it? I guess. And we signed the guy for a reason. We signed him kind of with 6 months, sort of 4 or 5 months before he could actually join us. So we've obviously seen something in him. So yeah, why not? Let's see what the kid can do.
It'd be interesting to see if Carl Walker-Peters is still here as well, Glenn. There's obviously rumours about Galatasaray. And did you say he looked like he was saying his goodbyes at the end of the game yesterday? Did you pick up on that? It was a slower walk around the pitch, wasn't it?
Yeah, someone who's, I won't say is a very sensible Saints fan, tweeted out that he was spending a lot longer than usual, sort of like walking around the pitch at the end, sort of like talking to people, gave his shirt away, that sort of thing. So whether you can read into that, I think we always knew that if anyone came in with any money, then 5-10 million or whatever, then we would let him go simply because of the basically the season's done, isn't it? And we'll get nothing for him in the summer because there's no way he's staying. It does seem to be a more of a trend that these days for players to go abroad and play. From English players, so I know it's silly season, but you're seeing Tyler Dibbling linked with Dortmund, for example, which wouldn't have happened 5-6 years ago, but since the likes of Sancho went abroad and obviously Bellingham now, it seems to be the thing for young players to do, and there are many others who have done that. So Walker-Peters obviously not young, but it just seems to be something that a lot of players seem to want to do now. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if he goes to Galatasaray. It'll be probably be a good move.
Worth noting that his best mate Dele Alli has recently signed for Besiktas. So he's in Istanbul as well. So that may be a factor in that potential move as well. I mean, personally, I'd be quite disappointed if he went to Turkey. I think that's probably a step down in terms of the level that he should be playing at.
Does it matter though? Does it matter to us? Because I'm kind of like he stayed last year. He gave us more than some of them, and he's been pretty honest about.
From our perspective, I think it makes very little difference. I mean, if we get a few million quid in, sort of this month, sort of 4 or 5 months before his contract runs out, then yeah, okay, fine. You take the money and run. But I think from his kind of career perspective, that when there was talk that he was sort of interesting the likes of, I don't know, Spurs, Newcastle, sides like that, last summer or maybe and the year before when we got relegated, to now then decide, well, no, I'm not going to try my luck and get another Premier League side. I'm gonna go to Turkey, and I assume he'll get paid a lot better over there. Certainly a more comfortable tax regime for footballers in Turkey these days. But yeah, I kind of wonder whether he's selling himself a little bit short there, and he should be possibly still looking to get himself on the fringes of that England squad, perhaps. But I don't know.
Does it make sense to you, George? I mean, to me, as Glenn says, the season's done, isn't it? And he's going presumably for free at the end of the season anyway. So if we can get any money for him, then that's a bonus. And I would probably say that applies to any of the others as well. If any decent offers come in, then there's a chance to get some money in the bank ahead of next year.
Yeah, I don't see him signing another contract. I think he'd be daft to sign a contract, especially considering relegation's all but guaranteed at this point, isn't it? And I don't really personally see him going to Galatasaray for the reasons mentioned, that he's probably a bit better than that in terms of what you see when some players go abroad. It's as if they're immediately out of the England plans. It might be different under Thomas Tuchel, but he said to Alfie earlier this season that he wants to get back in the England squad, and perhaps Galatasaray aren't the only team after him. I think they're allowed to speak to him in terms of a pre-contract agreement because it is up in 6 months. English clubs not so much allowed to do that at this stage. But I think you'd be better off being patient and maybe waiting until, for himself personally, waiting until the summer if he doesn't go this month, because he might even get more money in terms of the payout when you sign a new contract as a free transfer. You tend to get more money that way. So sort of either way, he's probably not going to be a Southampton player next season, and it doesn't really matter who he goes to, because he's probably going to stay in the Premier League and Southampton aren't going to be there, so you're not strengthening any rivals.
Also, last season when we had the situation with Che Adams and Stuart Armstrong, but because we were playing obviously to get promoted last season, there was a damn good reason to keep them. And because you've got the big sort of like financial bonus of getting promoted. Not that you didn't really know it this season. So, but you're aiming at that, and that's worth more than, a couple of million quid selling them in January. So it is a completely different situation. And I know even Urich has said that we need to keep all our best players. Yeah, you would say that, mate. We are relegated. So no, I just, whether it's Galatasaray or someone else. I mean, if I was Kyle, I think I'd wait till the end of the season, to be honest, for the reasons that George said, because
to get the signing on bonus. And
and there are lots of teams that would take him on. Maybe some wouldn't take him on to be first choice because he can cover both sides. He'd be a very, very good squad player if a team can convince him to go there. I mean, even Newcastle we played yesterday, they got 2 young kids at fullback, who one of which might get injured or lose form or whatever. So he'd be a good addition there. But whether he'd settle for being second choice, I don't know. But I think if I was him, having waited 4 years or 3.5 years into my contract, I think I'd certainly be waiting till the full benefits could be realised by moving for a free in the summer.
Let's do some score predictions for the weekend. One of us got a 3-pointer last week. It doesn't happen very often. Mr. Glen de la Cour. Alfie as well. I think he's had the weekend off to celebrate, actually, getting a prediction right. So Glen and Alfie both got a 3-pointer last week. There were a few others as well. So well done. Glen, I'll give you the honour of going first this week in that case. How do you see the Ipswich game panning out? Tougher one, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Well, I think all three results are eminently possible. So it's just a case of, how's your luck? Let's try and think of the logic here. I'm not going to be right 2 weeks running. So let's go for a 1-1 draw.
Defeat.
Yeah, let's go for a 1-1. Let's go for a 1-1 draw. But I actually think we might nick this one. But I'll go for a 1-1 draw.
All right, okay. George?
Copy and paste 3-1. Not because I think Southampton aren't good enough to beat Ipswich, but it's just the most common result this season, and I feel like probably see another one.
That's fair. That's a good logic. Better logic than most. Steve?
Well, we'll score because their defence is pretty awful, and we've found a way to actually trouble the scorers in the last few weeks, which is a little bit of a step forward. Can we not concede 3? That'd be nice. So I'll go for a 2-2. Why not?
All right. Well, I've gone for 1-1, and I'm going to change my mind now. So I'm going to go for 2-1 defeat, just to mix up a bit. And we always lose.
Still can't bring ourselves to predict a win.
No, I used to work with someone who's an Ipswich fan years ago, and I only ever hear from him twice a year when they beat us, and I get a message from him, and that's it. So I'm expecting to hear from him on Saturday night. So I'll go for a 2-1 defeat. If you're watching along live, put all your predictions into the comments there. Let's see what you can come up with. Got a few minutes left, so George, I just wanted to chat about the women's team and what on earth is going on there, because we talked at length about the men's team and their season being over by the end of January, and it's a similar story really for the women's team. We're not going up. We're not going to go down, and seems to be a bit of transfer business that's been going on too.
Yeah, I mean, 8th out of 12 teams, nowhere near bad enough to get relegated, but nowhere near good enough to get the one promotion spot. 8 points adrift to that with a couple of games to go, but they're not going to be able to turn it around because there's too many teams who've got more points than them and are closer to it. And as you mentioned, the transfer business, they've signed a load of WSL teenagers on loan this month. They've lost Freya Gregory, who was really good. She was recalled by Aston Villa to then be sold to Sunday's opponents, Newcastle, for a considerable amount of money. They've been unlucky with injuries, to be fair to them. They signed a couple of players who are now out. But I think if you're down to injuries and then you're bringing in teenagers, then your season's gone quite poorly in terms of recruitment. And they just seem like after last season, where they pushed on from their first season in the championship, they got more points, finished higher in the table, then lost Marianne Spacey-Cale. She stepped away and become director of women's football. Remy Allen's come in, and they've looked all right in some games, but then there's other games where they just never look like causing any problems for teams. And you look at someone like Durham, who beat them today, not tied to a men's club at all, but they're up there and they could get promoted into the Women's Super League. And you've got to look at sort of how they've done what they've done and look at what Saints have done. And they've just not, I don't think they've recruited well enough. They've lost players. They've lost Kayla Rendell and Ella Morris, 2 players who've been a part of the rise. They were always going to go to the Women's Super League. And there's more players in that squad who are young. And I think they'll go to the Women's Super League in the summer if clubs are after them. And they're going to possibly be even worse position with the squad. And that's a difficult position to be in. I think Portsmouth are guaranteed to go down this season. They don't think they've even won a game yet still. And so it's something to say from that perspective, but you're almost just looking for that game against Pompey at St. Mary's is the only thing left to get excited about. Yeah,
we were expecting them to kick on a bit this year, Glenn, and it's just not really happened, has it?
I think we were until you look beneath the surface. As George has highlighted, there was players that have been part of the rise. Rosie Parnell retired. You had her sort of natural replacement, Laura Rafferty, was allowed to leave. Katie Wilkinson, who's the all-time championship top scorer, she left as well. Lexi Lloyd-Smith, who was one of the better younger players, she left.
Is now the division's top scorer at Bristol City.
Yeah, it took 3 months to get a new manager in when Marianne Spacey-Cale went upstairs. And it was a very inexperienced Remy Allen, and she was talking a good game about getting promoted when she first came in. But it's almost like it's, if you want to be taken seriously, then do serious things. They've gone into the season really with one striker who has an injury record, a bit like Ross Stewart. Rihanna Dean is always injured. So they've been playing sort of midfielders up front, which is explained. If you take away the game against Pompey, who are so far worse than everybody else, everyone's scoring 5 and 6 against them. So Saints put 5 past them. If you take away that game, we've scored 10 goals in 11 games, which kind of tells you everything you need to know. So yeah. And this transfer window, 5 players all on loans. And if you watch their interviews, I know they're very young, and they say what they say what's on their mind when kids are that age, sort of thing, and they're all saying, "Oh, I'm looking forward to getting minutes in senior women's football." It's not about let's try and get Saints up the league and see where we are next season. So we've become like a finishing school for WSL teenagers, and it just, what are we doing? What are we doing as a club? Are we looking to kick on? Would we, you get players on loan, they're going to play at the expense of the players that you've got who are possibly going to be here next season. So are we running the team for Arsenal now? Or are we running the team for Chelsea, Aston Villa, wherever it is we're getting these players from? Or I think there needs to be some sort of statement, really. I mean, we've actually got a director of football, if you like, on the women's side. So maybe there needs to be some sort of statement about what the team is about.
What the ambition is.
Yeah, do serious things. Don't loan players to Portsmouth. If you want to do serious, if you want to be serious and want to be part of Southampton Football Club, then don't loan players to Portsmouth, because you're basically helping them out. I know it's very different in women's football to men's football with regards to the rivalries and stuff like that. But that's the sort of thing that people just look at it and go, "What?" And the club were embarrassed as well, because they didn't put out that she'd gone to Portsmouth in the tweet. Emma Thompson was her name. So it's just unserious things going on. And if you want to be taken seriously, you've got to do better than that.
Is it going to be another reset in the summer, Steve? Can you see that?
Possibly. I mean, we don't know what the situation is in terms of funding. I mean, obviously across the board, across the entirety of the club, men's and women's, going down, you're gonna see a cut in revenue. I don't know whether. I I imagine that it's possible that money that you put in for the women's side of the game is completely offset on the PSR regulation. So it might be that they can continue to fund it at the same level if they want to. I mean, given that seemingly last season there didn't seem to be any issues. So yeah, I mean, perhaps it'll carry on sort of in terms of the budgetary level. But yeah, something's got to be kind of looked at in terms of just how they kind of establish some sort of stability, because as Glen said, I mean, you normally when you bring a player in on loan, it's as an impact player, and Freya Gregory was exactly that. She was a player that ordinarily we wouldn't have been able to sign because she's at a club like Aston Villa where she's earning a lot more than I would imagine than all of our players, and we're not sort of having the silly sort of budgets that the likes of Newcastle and London City Lionesses are throwing around. So yeah, loan players in that sense are ones that are going to be subsidised by the parent club, and they're expected to make an impact, and she did. But I don't see how it's going to be possible for these five youngsters to all impact on the first team sort of together. I mean, you might have one that breaks out and shows something and just sort of sticks their hand up and says, "Yep, I'm here, and I'm gonna be the one that's gonna kind of stand out from this group." But you're not giving them the conditions to succeed in there, really, especially given the if you look at the results, I think it's 5 without a win, and the 2 draws that we conceded very late equalizers. So yeah, we're not lasting in games either, and it's very, very difficult to see how you kind of motivate the side for the remainder of the season. That Pompey game suddenly becomes a huge banana skin.
Oh God,
because this is the thing though, because if you're in a situation where you know that you're kind of just bumbling along to the end of the season, there's nothing to play for. As George said, you're not going to get relegated. You're not going to go up. And Pompey haven't won a game all season. They've got 2 points from 12 games, I think. And they come to St Mary's. This is their big opportunity. Whereas we're still kind of in that mindset of going through the motions, and maybe we're rotating players in and out and trying to find something that kind of works ahead of like making decisions on contracts in the summer. And actually, there's not a huge amount of motivation there, because, as you say, the rivalry between Saints and Pompey in the women's game isn't anywhere near as as fierce as the men's one for obvious reasons. I mean, it's just a shorter lived rivalry. I mean, it's not been a rivalry for so many years. So yeah, that game all of a sudden becomes a huge potential PR own goal for the club. Because I think is it on BBC Red Button? I think.
Oh Lord!
Sure.
I think because it's on the Saturday evening, isn't it? It's been moved for some sort of coverage, whether it's only YouTube or like FA Player or something like that. But it's definitely been moved for some sort of special coverage. So yeah, the club will be wanting to get a big crowd in, but they did that last week and they get turned over comfortably by Sunderland. And yeah, you end up with players and manager coming out and apologising. I mean, I think that's probably a little bit over the top personally for a fairly regulation 2-0 home defeat. But when you're trying to get people in the gates for these games, you've got to be showing people something that they can kind of cling to, if you like.
Yeah, you want them coming back, don't you? That's the thing.
Mm.
It's not just about how much money they spend in the fan zone. You want them coming back week in, week out, really. So, right, we shall see. Thank you for tonight. You can follow Total Saints Podcast on all the social media platforms. It's at Total Saints Pod. You can also check out the merch store. We've got the online shop, which is shop.totalsaints.co.uk. And as I mentioned earlier, you'll find us on Patreon. That's where you can support the podcast with a monthly contribution. You just have to visit patreon.com/Total Saints Podcast. Each of the tiers comes with different perks. There's the weekly shout outs at the end of the podcast for all of the patrons in our Francis Benali and our Mick Shannon tiers. So thank you to Dave Melton, Andy Hollis, Anthony Thompson, Gavin Ford, James Harron, Nicky Nicholson, Southampton NY, Drew Dyer, and James Kibbe. They're in our Francis Benali tier. Also, thank you to Colt Baker, Dave Ernsberger, Ed Busy, Nick Hingston, Phil Cook, Nick Reed, Paul Stewart, Phil Horstrup, Matt Hall, Mark Littlewood, Mike Etheridge, James Bobin, John Bevan, and Liam Dempsey, who you'll find in our Mick Shannon tier. Thank you to Paul Castle Associates and Steamtown Brewery for sponsoring TSP this season. Thank you to Steve and to Glenn. Thanks to George as well for jumping on this week. Great to have you on, George. Thank you for watching and listening, and we will see you again next Sunday night at 7 o'clock.